On World News tonight, the first major tropical storm of the season. People along the south coast are told to get out of the way. Millions of workers in danger of losing their overtime. Workers and their advocates challenge the Bush administration. The U.S. launches a new offensive to get Iraq under control, looking for weapons and information. And listen again to Katharine Hepburn, who died on Sunday.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. We begin with the weather this Monday. As so much of the country has discovered this year, there's nothing quite like it to disrupt life in general. And now it's the South Coast. The season has begun. Tropical Storm Bill is on its way to make life miserable for thousands of people along the Gulf Coast. ABC's Aaron Hayes is down there in waterlogged New Orleans. Aaron?
Well, that's right, Peter, and this storm does have officials worried, primarily because of the flooding they expect. Already along the coast, some places are under a foot of water or more. A storm surge of more than 3 feet came ashore in Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi at midday, and it has been raining all day. Not welcome in areas that have had rainfall saturate the ground for the past few weeks.
Probably 2.5 weeks ago, we got over 30 inches of rain in 7 days. And we sustained some flooding in people's homes back then. So, you know, with the saturation point the way it is right now, we're concerned about the rainfall.
And while the winds overall have been relatively mild, Bill has spawned some isolated tornadoes. One in Reserve, Louisiana, did damage earlier today. And Bill has been a wide storm, stretching all the way to Pascagoula, Mississippi, drenching that area. Floodwaters rose quickly there. Over in New Orleans, Bill's rains made for a soggy Monday in the French Quarter and slow going around the city this afternoon, dispiriting to tourists and residents alike.
If we get 10 more inches of rain tonight, I pray to God that we move and get away from here, evacuate this area.
But the good news for Louisiana, at least Bill is now a fast-moving storm heading north and east. This storm is expected to follow a path now into Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, and could cause trouble there in the form of flooding. Peter?
Many thanks, Aaron. Aaron Hayes in New Orleans. As Aaron points out, it's part of a pattern, and this is the first major tropical storm of the year, but very much part of a season. ABC's Ned Potter gives us some clues tonight on what lies ahead.
One of the very few good things to be said about this storm is that forecasters have seen it before. Based on where it started and where it's gone so far, they can predict its path well in advance.
Typically in June, we expect tropical development in the Western Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, and this was no exception.
Forecasters know that many storms begin off South America, and under similar circumstances, they often follow roughly the same path. In many cases, crossing the Gulf of Mexico and striking the Louisiana coast.
Here is 2.05.
As computers and satellites become more advanced, storm tracks can be plotted with much greater precision. But Louisiana was alerted long before Tropical Storm Bill took shape.
Every year we have to be prepared, whether it's forecast to be a below average or above average year.
As an experiment, the National Hurricane Center is now trying to plot storm paths 5 days in advance instead of the previous 3. You can see how Tropical Storm Bill is supposed to curve over the southeast. They warn that such forecasts are imprecise, but they're getting better.
Our 5-day forecast is about as good on average as our 3-day forecast was just 15 years ago.
Back in May, the Hurricane Center said this season would be busy with perhaps 15 hurricanes or tropical storms. The formation of Bill means they are off to an early start. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
An item about terrorism today. The Director of Homeland Security said the country is much better prepared for a terrorist attack, but Tom Ridge said there is no such thing as a fail-safe system. He may have been responding to a report from the Council on Foreign Relations, which maintains the country is dangerously unprepared, that about $98 billion is needed to establish what the Council calls a minimum effective response. In Iraq today, U.S. forces detained the mayor of the southern city of Najaf on charges of corruption. The mayor, a former colonel in Saddam Hussein's army, had been appointed by the U.S. Near Fallujah, west of Baghdad, there was another attack on a U.S. patrol, and a sound engineer with NBC was among the injured. And U.S. forces have launched yet another operation to stop the daily attacks. ABC's Jeffrey Kaufman is in Iraq tonight.
Open up! It was a series of simultaneous nighttime raids.
Open the door!
In search of supporters of Saddam Hussein.
There you go. Go.
Troops from the 4th Infantry have now conducted more than 25 raids.
It's okay.
They're not looking for him, they are looking for this.
Hey, we got one pistol.
But even this is hardly extraordinary in a country where most homes have weapons. In raids like this, the military says, munitions are often less important than the people who are seized.
We're learning all kinds of useful and interesting things that help us plan future raids and find more people that need to be removed from the scene.
The name is new, but Operation Sidewinder is really an extension of 2 earlier missions with similar objectives: to root out Iraqis who have been undermining efforts to restore stability and the infrastructure in this country. What's different about this one is the urgency.
Because increasing attacks on U.S. soldiers and key gas and oil pipelines are stalling efforts to rebuild this country. The military says more than 300 people have been detained in this and other operations since Sunday, but they did not find any of the high-level Saddam supporters they've been looking for. Jeffrey Kaufman, ABC News, Baghdad.
One other item from the Iraq campaign, the U.S. has returned 5 border guards to Syria. They were wounded and captured along the Syrian-Iraqi frontier in a firefight with U.S. forces more than a week ago. It was an unusual day in the Middle East. The Israeli army was pulling out of the Palestinian territories, some of them anyway, and 3 of the more militant Palestinian organizations got through the first day of what is supposed to be a 3-month moratorium on attacks against Israelis. In Jerusalem tonight, here's ABC's John Yang.
This morning, an Israeli army bulldozer cleared the way for Palestinians to move freely along the main thoroughfare in Gaza for the first time in nearly 3 years. It also provided Jamal al-Dura his first opportunity to return to the site where he and his 12-year-old son were caught in a gun battle in October 2000. It was one of the most notorious incidents of the current conflict. Al-Dura's son, Mohammed, was killed. In Bethlehem today, Palestinians prepared to take charge of security there under an agreement reached this afternoon. The job of policing the 3-month truce now belongs to Palestinian Security Chief Mohammed Dahlan. It will not be easy. The security force has been gutted by the Israeli military. How long will it take you to rebuild them?
At least I need 6 months.
In the meantime, he says, we will try our best. Already we have foiled 6 major attacks. For this truce to hold, Mr. Dahlan says Israel must act quickly to improve Palestinians' daily lives, including limiting checkpoints such as this one. That would give him the credibility to take on the militant groups directly.
It will allow us to attack as normal against the people who are breaking the law.
Just today, though, renegade militants killed a truck driver in the West Bank, a vivid illustration of the challenge facing Mr. Dahlan. John Yang, ABC News, Ramallah.
North Africa, in Algeria, a military transport plane crashed into a house southwest of the capital, Algiers. 17 people died, including 6 children. 7 other houses were damaged. Witnesses say they saw flames coming from the plane just before it crashed. We got this video today from the Pentagon of North Korean fighter jets intercepting a U.S. surveillance plane over the Sea of Japan. It happened in March. We reported on it then, but these are the first pictures which indicate how close they are. 4 MiGs came very close to the U.S. plane. The encounter lasted for 22 minutes. There was no communication between any of the aircraft, and the U.S. plane returned to its base without suffering any damage, though it must have been hard on their nerves. When we come back, the domestic news. Almost every state hours from budget deadlines. For some, essential services are on the line tomorrow. In other news tonight, millions of workers who think their overtime pay may be lost or altered. A closer look at why the government wants to change the rules. And at the end of the broadcast tonight, another opportunity to think about Katharine Hepburn. She certainly had a mind of her own.
Oh, I'm going to live in London. I'm going to live alone.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by KC Masterpiece Barbecue Sauce.
Several items in the national brief today. Police in Florida issued a national Amber Alert after a woman with bipolar disorder drove her car through a sliding glass door and took her children away from her mother, who'd been caring for them. The police say that Nora Montano is a severe danger to her children and may be traveling with her ex-husband. A study in the journal Obstetrics and Gynecology finds that a new treatment for morning sickness is safe and effective. And 70% of pregnant women get some morning sickness. This is a wristband that interrupts nerve signals associated with nausea. It has electric impulses which can be interrupted. Researchers say it is safe for the fetus. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average finished the second quarter with its largest quarterly gain since 2001, up more than 12%. The S&P 500, Standard & Poor's, had its biggest quarterly gain in 4.5 years. For the day, that's today, the Dow was up more than 70 points to close at 77.75. On the NASDAQ, stocks were up more than 6 points. California, speaking of money, is on the verge of a crisis. New Jersey is on the verge of a crisis. And 13 other states are facing financial troubles, and most of them have until midnight to approve their budgets for the next fiscal year. California has a record deficit, $38 billion, and so far, there does not appear to be a solution. Here's ABC's Judy Muller.
With just hours to go before the deadline, California lawmakers are nowhere near agreement on a budget. That happens almost every year, but this year is different.
The state has essentially exhausted its ability to borrow more money. And because of California's financial situation, I do not have the latitude to go back to Wall Street and borrow again.
California has a record deficit. Republicans vow to fight any tax increase. Democrats vow to fight any more spending cuts. That impasse equals fiscal disaster. Some 30,000 state workers could lose their jobs by September. All others would be cut back to minimum wage.
We're talking about $675 for doctors, nurses, teachers throughout the system, prison guards, CHP, highway patrol persons.
Those facing the biggest cuts? Community colleges, public schools, programs for the disabled, nursing homes, and businesses that contract with the state. California may have the worst deficit of any state, but it's certainly not alone in wrestling with a budget crisis. 46 states have midnight deadlines, and many of them are in big trouble. Hardest hit are those states caught by the double whammy of a huge increase in required health care costs and a huge revenue loss from the collapse of the high-tech economy.
The real difference this time is that this revenue decline has been rapid, it's been deep, and it's been long.
From New Jersey to Oregon, dozens of states are facing painful cuts in services, but California's pain is likely to have a ripple effect.
California is the world's 5th or 6th largest economy, so the fact that we have our financial back against the wall is an extraordinary problem.
An extraordinary problem that may end up hurting a lot of ordinary people. Judy Muller, ABC News, Los Angeles.
When we come back this evening, millions of ordinary people who believe that their overtime pay is threatened. We'll take a closer look. The Bush administration wants to change the laws regulating overtime pay in the United States. The rules are more than 50 years old, and the administration says it's time to update them. About 73 million people work at jobs where they are eligible for overtime, and about 10 million work enough hours to actually get the extra pay. But if these modifications occur, there will be winners and there will be losers. ABC's Lisa Stark takes a closer look.
All we want is our fair share. Workers came from all over the country promising to fight the proposed rules. The regulations determine which white-collar workers get overtime and which don't. Blue-collar workers, such as carpenters and mechanics, aren't affected. Currently, overtime pay is guaranteed to those earning less than $8,060 a year. That would jump to anyone earning less than $22,100 a year, and that benefits more than 1 million workers, including Carlos Morales, who sorts mail for a Chicago company.
I mean, everybody wants more money for the hard work that they put into their job.
But for those earning between $22,000 and $65,000 a year, there is a gray area. Whether they get overtime depends on their job description, and that's where the big controversy comes in. Critics say the problem is a lot more people would be classified as managers or professionals under new definitions and would not be eligible for overtime.
This is a bald-faced attack on the Fair Labor Standards Act. It won't be costly to employers, it will be costly to those employees who depend on overtime.
Workers are nervous that they'll lose overtime money they use to pay bills. Diane Flock is a nurse.
This is going to affect nursing morale. It's going to make it more difficult for hospitals to fill those gaps in nursing.
The Bush administration insists the current rules are confusing and outdated and says only about 640,000 workers will lose overtime pay.
We're not trying to make it easier for people to be exempt from overtime or not exempt from overtime. We're trying to make it clearer to people and more certain so that people will know.
The final rule won't take effect for months, so for now, the Bush administration has a fight on its hands. Lisa Stark, ABC News, Washington.
The country's oldest dictionary has added some new words. The latest revision of the Dictionary of American English adds dot-comer, this time someone who works in an interrelated field or an internet-related field. McJob, which is a low-paying dead-end career. Dead presidents, another term for paper currency. And frankenfood, which is any food that has been genetically engineered. Dictionary has 250,000 words in it now. Webster's first dictionary in 1806 had 20,000. When we come back, Katharine Hepburn. Finally tonight, Katharine Hepburn. Her great career and her very interesting life, she was 96, have been given a lot of attention since she died on Sunday. A staff writer at the Washington Post, Stephen Hunter, got our attention when he wrote, correctly we thought, that millions of people who never knew her will feel diminished by her absence. And then he wrote, death finally came after being put off for nearly a century. But you can just guess that she kept him waiting in the foyer until she was good and ready. Here's ABC's Bill Blakemore.
Katharine Hepburn was a one-woman social revolution. She launched a new era of women's liberation, on screen
I'm going to live alone.
and off, and not only because she wore pants.
I just wore dungarees because I'd always worn dungarees.
She controlled her own career in Hollywood when no actor could, man or woman.
RKO wanted her to do a movie called Mrs. Carey's Chickens. She wouldn't do it. She quit, bought out her contract, left, went back to Broadway. Unheard of? Astonishing. A contract in Hollywood then was like a sentence in jail. You had to live up to it or you would never work again.
So she got ownership of Philadelphia Story, made it a hit on Broadway, then forced Hollywood to film it her way.
She understood you had to have all the chips to play cards in Hollywood, and she had all the chips.
America's women watched closely as she played herself on screen. Strong, smart, independent. America's men were riveted. She did not try to fulfill their fantasies, but challenged men to be themselves.
Are you always much too busy?
What for?
I was wondering about this afternoon.
Sorry.
Tomorrow afternoon?
What's on your mind?
I'd like to take you to a baseball game.
Okay.
Hepburn taught men and women how self-confidence and intelligence can enhance natural beauty, leaving the blonde bombshells far behind.
Thought you might want to kiss me goodbye.
Part of the secret of the on-screen heat and love that never slackened through 9 films over 27 years with Spencer Tracy? Always, she was his equal.
It was very much a male-female thing, with each one wanting to dominate.
Despite those 4 Oscars, she never attended an Oscar ceremony, ignored Hollywood parties, never belonged to Hollywood, but was one of its leaders. At a price. She said for her craft, she sacrificed having children.
Supposing little Johnny or little Katie had the mumps, and I had an opening night, I'd want to strangle the children.
She said no one could have it all.
For the love of God, can't we love one another just a little?
She had her craft.
Told her it was
Her
wrong.
2nd, 3rd, and 4th Oscars were in her 60s and 70s. Age did not frighten this woman.
You're my knight in shining armor. Don't you forget it.
With her clear-eyed intelligence and her indomitable sense of fun,
Oh, what's the matter? Get lonely?
Katharine Hepburn showed us how it is possible to be both strong and beautiful. Bill Blakemore, ABC News, New York.
That's our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Have a good evening. Good night.